you doing? This is Rick Caldwell with Caldwell Apologetics. How are we doing this evening? How are we doing? I had to start a little later than I wanted to, about 20 minutes later. I had to get some things situated, but I am here. I am here and you are here. And that's a good thing, right? Hope you're all doing well. And we have an exciting live today. I'm going to continue the series on logic. Some reached out to me and said, Rick, you're going to continue that series on logic? And yes, I most certainly will continue that series on logic. And so a few people are here. Let's see, Marie and Babes, happy Thursday. Karen is here. Let's see. And Celie is here. All right. All right. Yeah, long time. Yeah, a couple of months ago, I had to take a break from the live stream for health reasons. But I am back, and I've been doing live streams for a while. Well, Karen, I'm glad you're here. So I am active. I'm active on this channel. I've been doing a series on identifying false teachers. So if you haven't checked that out, Karen, I highly suggest you go check that out. How you doing, Jackie? How you doing? Glad you're here. All right. So we have a wonderful lesson today, and I hope that you are all edified by this lesson. And by the way, I'm doing some upgrades. I've actually completed all the upgrades. You don't see it. Maybe you've probably noticed different camera, new chair. There's a lot of gadgets in front of me. You can't see the gadgets, but I'm going to do a reveal very soon of all the new gadgets that I have here, all the new tech gadgets that help me improve my production value of this channel and the content. So stay tuned. I will do a reveal soon, but I am looking forward to availing these tools in order to do more, right? Do more for the glory of God. All right. Yes, definitely check it out when you get some time, Karen. All right. So today we are talking about logic. Logic. Why do Christians? Well, I know it's been a while since I've done this series on logic. But why does logic matter? Why does discussion of logic matter to the Christian? Why should we care about that? I want to kind of pause for a moment and get you to think about that. Why should we care about logic? Because the God who we serve, the God who we worship, the God who created us in all things is logical. In fact, the very grounds of logic would not even exist if the God of the Bible did not exist. So this is foundational. And one of the things I want to impress upon all of you, and this goes for me as well, is that biblical thinking is logical. Biblical thinking is logical. And one of the things, why is this series so important? Why do I spend time? Well, one of the things, if you've just been on social media enough and checked out the discourse, right? You will quickly see that those that profess the name of Jesus Christ sometimes are not thinking logically, right? Look what Celie says here. Celie says, logic matters in proper interpretation of Scripture. It also matters because we are told to love God with all we are, including our minds. Amen. Yes, yes, yes. Very good. And we looked at that text at the beginning of our series first. So for the newcomers, I would highly recommend you go back and look at the beginning if you're like wanting to follow where this conversation has been going around logic. I have videos. I plan to actually create a playlist that might make things easier for everyone. But videos are there. You can go back and start video number 1 on what logic is. And we're going to do a little bit of review today because I know it's been some time, but that's look at what Celie says here. Yes, without logic, how we actually interpret the scriptures, we must do it in a logical fashion, right? And she's right. We're told to love God with our complete being, even our minds. one of the things that I am really troubled by is this sentiment of anti-intellectualism that's so pervasive in modern evangelicalism, where it seems like people want to let go and let God, and that means also shut their minds off at the same time. God, ladies and gentlemen, saints of God, God gave us a mind to think. We must use it. And when we use it, we must be rational and logical in how we use this gray matter between our ears. And so we honor God by thinking biblically, and thinking biblically means thinking logically. Yes, Berean Babe says, yes, God is logical. Without logic, you can't make sense of things. Yes, you can't make sense of anything without logic. Okay, so, and God is the very foundation of that. So this is why we are spending our time on this labor of love about logic, because we care about the things that our God cares about, right? So remember in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 18 says, come, let us what? Reason together. So we deal with a God of reason, of logic, of rationality, right? So with that being said, let's start the presentation. All right, today we're going to be talking about deductive and inductive arguments, deductive and inductive arguments. But before we get started with those details, we will do a bit of a review, So we will kind of go down memory lane and cover where we have been so far. So we've talked about logic, and I want to make sure we define our terms, ladies and gentlemen. So the first thing is, what is logic? What, for those, I know it's been a while, I know it's been a minute, but guess what? It's never a bad thing to do a quick review, right? So logic is the science of evaluating arguments, right? The science of evaluating arguments, right? That is logic. That's how we're going to define logic. Well, what's an argument, right? Well, arguments, a real argument has two pieces. You have premises. Premises are reasons to prove the point. And you have what's called a conclusion. And conclusions are the point you're trying to prove, right? So a argument is composed of two parts, premises and a conclusion. Then what we covered before in previous videos is, how do we recognize arguments? How do we recognize arguments? Well, you recognize arguments by making sure that what the statements that you're looking at contain premises and a conclusion. If it doesn't have premises and conclusion, you're not dealing with an argument. You might be dealing with an opinion. You might be dealing with illustration. You might be dealing with all kinds of things, but you may not be dealing with an argument. In fact, a lot of times people engage in discourse with one another, and one side might be making statements, but they're not really making arguments, right? As people of God, we need to be making sound, logical, cogent. I'm using these words, strong. We'll like in future videos, like the words like strong and cogent and sound and valid, those words will have more meaning as we define those later in future videos. And then we talked about grading arguments. How do we grade an argument? Well, first of all, we need to separate the premises from the conclusion, remember? And then you evaluate the premise. Well, how do you evaluate the premises? Well, you first see, do the premises support the conclusion? If the premises do not support the conclusion, you have the makings of a bad argument. Once you've determined that the premises support the conclusion, the next thing you have to do is ask yourself, are the premises true? Are they in fact true? You may have a situation where you have premises that support a conclusion, but the premises themselves are not true, right? And so that's the difference between a strong, we're going to deal strong and a cogent argument, right? A cogent argument, specifically when we talk about inductive arguments. Well, we're going to dig into the definitions in a moment. start with you evaluating, does the premise support the conclusion? If it does, it's considered strong, right? But then does it actually support, are the premises actually true? If it's true, then you're dealing with a cogent argument, right? So let's look at what we're going to deal with next. So today we're going to be talking about these two types of arguments, deductive arguments and inductive arguments. And it's going to be a lot to take in, but there's going to be little practice problems towards the end I think will help provide a bit of practicality for all of us. So think about this. So how do we think about a deductive argument? A deductive argument is based on the premises supporting the conclusion. The argument is structured in such a way that it's impossible to be false. If the premises support the conclusion, it is structured in such a way that it's impossible to demonstrate that the argument is false. So that's why I have the word impossible below deductive. On the other hand, inductive is an issue if the premises support the conclusion, what the argument is arguing for is that it's improbable that the argument is false. It's improbable, not impossible, but improbable that the argument is false. So that's the distinction between deductive arguments and inductive arguments. And we're going to look at examples. So fear not, we're going to look at examples shortly. So here's an example of a deductive argument. Donald Trump is taller than Chelsea Clinton. And I actually looked this up. He actually is taller than Chelsea Clinton. And Chelsea Clinton is taller than Hillary Clinton. Therefore, it necessarily follows that Donald Trump is taller than Hillary Clinton. Do you see why this is considered a deductive argument? Well, because the two premises there, Donald Trump is taller than Chelsea Clinton, and Chelsea Clinton is taller than Hillary Clinton, supports the conclusion that it necessarily follows. That means it's impossible to be otherwise, that Donald Trump is taller than Hillary Clinton. You see that? So, and notice there are indicator words. We'll talk about some of those in a moment that can help us determine whether or not we're looking at an inductive argument or a deductive argument. Next example, let's look at an inductive example. 80% of politicians are men. Hillary Clinton is a politician. Therefore, it's probable that Hillary Clinton is a man. Now, we're not talking about whether or not this is a good argument or not. We're talking about, is this form of argumentation inductive or deductive? In this case, it's inductive because you see that it's structured in such a way that the premises support the conclusion, right? So notice the indicator word. It is probable that Hillary Clinton is a man, right? Based on the two premises, 80% of politicians are men. Hillary Clinton is a politician. Therefore, conclusion is probable that Hillary Clinton is a man, okay? So you see that's an inductive example right there. All right. So I mentioned before the indicator words. So on the left-hand side, you have, for the deductive arguments, you will see conclusions and the conclusion statement where these words may appear. Definitely, certainly, absolutely. But be warned, sometimes individuals will use deductive indicator words to try to bolster their argument, right? When their premises don't actually support a definite, certain, or absolute conclusion. So just because someone throws a word in there doesn't mean necessarily that this is, in fact, a deductive argument. Sometimes it can be rhetorical, a rhetorical device that people are using. Definitely, certainly, absolutely. So be warned about that. On the right-hand side, you have indicator words and conclusions for inductive arguments, probably, reasonable, plausibly, and possibly. So if you see those types of words, that would give you an indication that you're possibly looking at an inductive argument, okay? So time for some practice problems. Time for some practice problems. So Seeley makes a point. I think before I get to practice items, Seeley says, with 80% of population being men, 20% being women, that is about the probability of hearing can be a man is not that likely. Well, based on the premises that were used to support the conclusion, like I said before, obviously that's a bad argument, right? Because it's ultimately fallacious. But if we assumed that's the data that we have, those premises do support that specific conclusion. Now, the question we have to ask ourselves is, remember Seeley, I said, and that'll be for a later video, we're not going to cover that this evening, is there's a difference between a strong argument and a cogent argument. So a cogent argument is where you have premises that support the conclusion, but then you have to ask, are the premises in fact true? Are they in fact true? Are there gaps there that would actually invalidate our conclusion? So in that case, then you're correct that there would be an issue with the argument. The assumption, all I'm doing right now, Seeley, is merely looking at the structure right now. Later on, we'll deal with things like the soundness or the cogency of arguments, right? We'll cover that in future videos, so I appreciate the comment. All right, so let's deal with some practice problems. Practice problems. So what we want to determine is whether or not these statements here represent a deductive or an inductive argument. Thomas is a plumber, and a plumber has one sister who is named Clara. Therefore, it certainly is the case that Clara's brother is a plumber. Is this an example? Then this is going to be audience participation. Is this an example of a deductive or inductive argument? Is this an example of a deductive or inductive argument? Look at the structure. What I mainly want you to focus on this evening, during this video, during this slide, is the structure, the form of the argument. Is this a form for a deductive argument or inductive? Uh-oh, I see inductive. So Seeley says inductive. Karen said, why? I want to ask, you know how I am. I'm not going to just let you give an answer. Why? I should have gave you a two-part question. Give an answer and why. What about this argument makes you conclude that this is inductive versus deductive? Seeley and Karen, since you both gave answers. What about this argument? Are there indicator words? I'm trying to work with the class here. Are there indicator words that kind of push you in a certain direction? Is there something about the structure of this argument? Anything about the argument that helps? Seeley, Karen, since you both answer, or anyone else? What is it about the structure of this argument? All right. No one's answering. Okay. Well, I would say a clue here about what direction we should go in is there are indicator words. You see, what's the indicator word in this argument? The word, it seems that the deductive word is certainly being incorrectly used in this case. Okay, why, Seeley? Why being incorrectly used? That's why we're doing it. There's no harm here. We're all learning together, but why? So yes, indicator word is definitely certainly, but look at the structure. Thomas is a plumber, right? That's a statement. Thomas has a sister who is named Clara, right? You got that? Thomas has a sister who's Clara. Therefore, it certainly is the case that Clara's brother is a plumber. Thomas has one sister, right? You see that? You say just because a plumber has a sister doesn't mean the sister has a plumber. Well, look at the structure. Hold on now. Hold on. That's why we're doing this lesson. Hold on. Now, the thing is, remember what we're not doing, Seeley. We're not dealing with for example, when we're talking about a deductive argument, we would be talking about the soundness of the argument. We're not dealing with soundness of the arguments yet. If we're dealing with inductive, we're not dealing with cogency, okay? All we're dealing with is the form, okay? The structure. Now, if you look at the structure, Thomas is a plumber. Thomas has one sister who is Clara. Brother-sister relationship here. 1 and 1. Therefore, it certainly is the case that Clara's brother is a plumber. Does that necessarily follow? I mean, let's not deal with cogency or soundness. Let's deal with the structure. Based on the structure, this would be what kind of argument? So Karen says the conclusion does not necessarily support the premise. So what about the form, though? I know. I don't want us to get distracted yet on does the conclusion necessarily follow the premise. We're not grading the argument. We're just looking at the form of the argument. Sorry if it presents a little bit of confusion, but I want to make sure we're focused on that. Is that helpful, everyone? So the answer is, I think many of you probably know what I'm about to say. It's a deductive argument because of the indicator word, right? The structure, you have Thomas is a plumber. Thomas has one sister who is Clara. Therefore, it certainly is the case that Clara's brother is a plumber. I mean, you have the relationship back here in the second statement. So I'm trying to follow where the audience is going here, saying it doesn't necessarily follow. So the form is not solid. Okay. But is it a deductive argument? That's all I'm asking. We're not dealing with whether it's solid. We're not dealing with whether it's cogent, what type of form is the argument in. Oh, I misread it. Oh, now you see. Okay, now look at. So I'm not trying to argue about form. I'm not trying to argue about cogency. I'm not trying to argue about whether it's solid. Or all I'm trying to do is argue about what form is this argument in. That's it. That's it. That's all my mission is for this evening. As I misread sentence number 2. Okay, in light of that, Seeley, what's your answer? I misread sentence number 2. Okay. Deductive. Okay, we can move on. We can move on. Okay. All right. See, I'm not that hard. I'm not that hard to deal with. But you see what I'm trying to bring out here is that we're focused mainly on the form. You know, there are going to be some statements like, Rick, that's not necessarily true. I'm focused today, this evening. I want to make sure we understand. I'm focused mainly on the form. Okay. Berean Babe said it's a deductive argument. Busy week at work. Oh, well, I'm telling you my war story at work, but I'll spare you the details. All right, so let's move on. Deductive is the answer. So here's another practice. Very few investors came to the presentation. Since Barbara came to the presentation, it is unlikely that Barbara is an investor. What form of argument is this? I'm going to ask the question in that way. I'm not asking about cogency. I'm not asking about any of that, okay? I'm asking about the form, the structure of the argument. Is it deductive or inductive? Look at the structure. Is there anything that kind of gives you a hint? Deductive or inductive? All right. So Karen says inductive. Why? I'm not going to let you off the hook. Just give me an answer. Why are you saying inductive? What about the form of this argument gives you presents this as a inductive argument? All right. Karen's the only one who's going to answer, but give you some time to think about it. Let me go ahead and give the answer. It is an inductive argument. Why is it an inductive argument? Well, mainly if you look at the structure, right? Yes, the word unlikely is a dead giveaway, right? So that gives that deals with the idea of improbability, right? Improbable is the hallmark of an inductive argument. So you're looking and it supports that, right? So very few investors came to the presentation, right? Since Barbara came to the presentation, it's unlikely. So these two premises here support the conclusion of Barbara being unlikely to be an investor, right? So that would make it an inductive argument. Okay. What about this one? Okay. All unmarried men are bachelors. I'm smiling because I'll tell you in a minute. Therefore, it necessarily follows that all bachelors are unmarried men. Which one is this? Deductive or inductive? Deductive or inductive? Karen says, don't let Karen be the only one to answer now. Karen says, Celie and Karen both say deductive. Why? Why deductive? What's the giveaway? What's the giveaway? What about this argument? If you had to explain it to another person, hey, you say, this is why I feel this is a deductive argument. So Karen says the word definitely or necessarily, right? Necessarily follows, right? When you see that, it's a kind of a hint that, hey, I may be dealing with a deductive argument. That's right, necessarily follows. So the answer is deductive, right? Now, let me just say for the record, this is actually a bad argument, okay? So, I know some of you got caught up trying to look and see if it was cogent or soft. This is a bad argument. Actually, this is part of a well-known fallacy, actually, logical fallacy. We'll deal with logical fallacies later in a later video, but I'm going to build the foundation first. That's my goal, to build the foundation. Grace and peace to all of God's people. Grace and peace to you, Dwayne. Okay, so next one. All right. While playing blackjack, David lost 9 hands in a row. Therefore, the next hand will probably win. Is this a deductive or inductive argument? Remember, we're only dealing with the form. Dwayne, you just came in, brother. We're not dealing with whether or not this is cogent or sound, the soundness of the argument. We're dealing with the structure of the argument, whether this is the form of a deductive or inductive. So Celie says inductive. Karen says inductive. And then Dwayne says, got in here a little late, but glad to be here. You can always watch the replay, brother. And we're continuing our series on logic. So I don't know if you've been following that series, Dwayne, but we're digging deeper into understanding the difference between deductive and inductive arguments. So, which is very helpful. No, you don't need to say sorry. You're here, and you can watch the replay. We're going through some practice problems, Susie Q. And so a couple of answers been given. The argument is while playing blackjack, David lost 9 hands in a row. Therefore, the next hand will probably win. Is this the structure of a deductive or inductive argument? Now, Karen and Celie both said inductive. Now, you already know, if you know me well enough, my follow-up question. So you should already have that ready. Why would you call this an inductive argument? What about this argument? What about the structure? What about the way it's formed? Yeah, even Susie Q says, hey, it's an inductive argument. And notice both Karen and Seeley say, hey, that word probably is a big indicator word, right? That indicates that this is likely an inductive argument. Okay. Very good. Inductive for the win. Next one. No mammals or fish, therefore no fish or mammals. Is this a inductive or deductive? Is this deductive or inductive? Anyone? All right, so Susie says it is a deductive argument. Seeley says it's a deductive argument. I want to know why. Why? Now, the thing is, this time, are you seeing the indicator words this time? You see any indicator words to help you out? Both of you say deductive, though. Why? Okay, therefore, really? Because we could put therefore, something is, I could say no mammals or fish, therefore it is unlikely that no fish or mammals. So the therefore itself, really is not helpful in understanding the structure, because a lot of you can have the inductive arguments that use the word therefore. And then Seeley says, nope. I guess nope to the therefore. I don't know what the nope. I guess the nope was referring to the therefore. Well, it's what I would call an inference, right? So that inference here that by definition, fish are not mammals, right? Right? We know that, right? So it necessarily follows that no fish are mammals. It's just restating the premise as the conclusion, just wording it here. So it necessarily follows. Even though the word necessarily follows, or certainly, or absolutely, those indicator words are not there, you can infer that this is a deductive statement, argument, which is the answer, based on the structure, right? So this gets to the next point. Okay, next point is you're gonna run into arguments, or you'll have an opportunity to make arguments where there may not be indicator words. So when you think of indicator words, you've been looking at a few examples already where words like necessarily would denote a deductive argument. Words like probably would denote a inductive argument. Well, we saw that last example that you can have an argument where those indicator words are not there, and it still could be one or the other, right? So how do you deal with that? That's why we're going to talk about argument form. And there's two categories here and subcategories underneath these. So for how do you know you're looking at a deductive versus an inductive argument, even in the instance where there may not even be indicator words, right? Well, on the left, you have deductive. And if you're dealing with a math problem, right? Like, for example, if x plus y equals 10 and x equals 5, it necessarily follows that y equals 5. Or I could take out necessarily follows. Therefore, y equals 5. I don't need the indicator word there, and you should know that that's what? That's a deductive argument. It's necessarily follows, like 5 plus 5 will always equal 10, right? So if x plus y equals 10 and x equals 5, y must equal 5, right? So you don't need necessarily follows there at all, right? And then the issue of definition. If I said that Kevin's wound was fatal, therefore Kevin's wound is deadly, fatal and deadly are essentially synonymous. So if you see a definition like that, that's the form of definition, a deductive argument in the form of definition, then obviously it necessarily follows, right? Then you will have things like the three below. You will have different type of syllogisms, and we'll cover some of those later. Categorical syllogisms, and you have hypothetical. So with hypothetical, let's talk about categorical. Categorical syllogisms will typically have the structure of all, no, or some throughout the structure, right? That will be an indicator that you're looking at a deductive argument in the form of a categorical syllogism. In fact, in the Bible, can anyone, let's think about this for a minute. We always got to go to scripture. Can anyone think of an example of a syllogism? Well, let me go to the next one, and then I'll ask the question. Then you have an example of a hypothetical syllogism. And the structure of a hypothetical syllogism usually has the structure of if then type structure. If this, then that is typically the structure of a hypothetical syllogism, right? Then you have what's called a disjunctive syllogism. So the last three I'm talking about: categorical, hypothetical, disjunctive. So what's the deal with disjunctive? Disjunctive syllogisms are in the structure of either or propositions. So the way it's typically structured is, I'll give you an example. Miami is either in Tennessee or in Florida. Miami is not in Tennessee, therefore Miami is in Florida. You see that? That's an example of a disjunctive syllogism. And you see it necessarily follows because I've eliminated one of the possible options. Since Miami is not in Tennessee, it necessarily follows that Miami is in Florida, right? Follow that? And then on the right-hand side, you have the form of or inductive, or what's called a prediction. And so prediction uses past or present details in order to predict something about the future, right? So you see something in the past or present to make a statement about what is likely to happen in the future. That would be form of a prediction. An analogy would compare two things, and based on the comparison of two things, it makes a conclusion about one of the two things, maybe commonality between those two things, right? Causal inference deals with cause and effect or vice versa. So if you have a form of an argument that deals with cause and effect or vice versa, you're dealing with a causal inference as well. A generalization where you take a sample, use a sample to make a conclusion about the whole. That would be a type of form of generalization. Authority, where the argument uses someone like an authority, someone in the position of in the know, in order to bolster the claim about the conclusion. And then signs, like for example, if something costs X, therefore I conclude the price of the product is X. That would be an example of signs. All right. So I hope those definitions were helpful, because very soon, right now, we're going to do some practice problems. So we're going to be focusing right now on deductive, the types of deductive arguments. So the first one up here, I hope you're paying attention. Let me go back to the previous slide, right? Remember, I hope you were paying attention with the definitions I gave you. So we'll be focusing on initially deductive, right? So Michael suffers from arachnophobia. Therefore, Michael has a fear of spiders. What type of deductive argument is this? Is it a categorical syllogism, argument from definition, hypothetical syllogism? Seeley says she's fast on the trigger. She says definition. Anyone else before I reveal the answer? 3 options are, Susie Q says definition. All right. Anyone else? Count down to 3. 3, 2, 1. The answer is going to be revealed as argument from definition. So you got right on the buzzer, Karen. So the 3 ladies here, Karen, Susie, Celie, all got it correct. All right, next one. If John gets married, then John will no longer be a bachelor. John will get married. Therefore, John will no longer be a bachelor. Which structure, which form of deductive argument is this? Right now, we're focusing only on deductive arguments, okay? So all our options deal with deductive arguments. Which one? Is it definition, mathematics, or hypothetical? Susie says definition. All right. Any other takers? Anyone else? Karen says definition. Now, I want you to, I'm not trying to dissuade your answers, but look at the structure. And I know I gave you a lot of definitions really, really quick, and I was hoping that you would write some of those definitions down. Look at the structure here. So we got 2 answers, and then both are definition. Definition. Look at the structure. And then after this, I'm going to ask a question, a Bible question. Oh, people are changing their answer now. Karen says no. In second thought, I think it's hypothetical. And Celie now says, well, Celie just finally gave her answer, hypothetical. And Dwayne says, sounds to me like hypothetical. Why? Why, Dwayne? What is it? It says, and then Berean Babe says hypothetical. What about this? Gives you the clue that this may be hypothetical. Why move from definition to hypothetical? What about the structure of the argument based on the definitions I gave you before? Oh, the truth emerges. All right, what's the answer? Okay. Interesting point. Yeah, glad you're here, Lindsay. It said the first sentence is hypothetical, the if then, but the second is definitely definitional. Will, right? Future, right? So consider that as well, Susie Q. So the answer is hypothetical. Hypothetical for the win. All right. Yes. So everyone, if you notice the structure, the if-then structure is the key. The if-then structure is an indicator. Like you're looking at if this, then that. Therefore, the conclusion, John will no longer be a bachelor, right? So this is hypothetical. This is a hypothetical syllogism. Now, a question. In the Bible, you can think of some examples. I know we got some good Bible students here. In the Bible, because, we want to take this word of God, right? What chapter or argument in the Bible can you think of that uses some type of hypothetical syllogism? Can anyone give an example? I can think of one, but you might, that's why we're here together. I know I'm around smart people, so I'm sure that others will think of other places. I'll give you one real quick, just to kind of move the conversation along. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, where the Apostle Paul talks about the truth of the resurrection and connects the fact that if Christ was not raised, then we're dead in our sins and our faith is vain. If Christ was not raised, he uses a hypothetical syllogism in there. Obviously he's using the structure of a hypothetical syllogism, the event is not in itself is not hypothetical. So we want to make sure that we make a distinction there. He's talking about an event that already had transpired, but he uses the if-then type structure in 1 Corinthians 15. And Seeley says, I can't think of anything specific, but it is throughout Proverbs, okay? The book of Deuteronomy, okay? And Susie Q says 2 Chronicles 7:14. Okay, all right. All right. Oh, you're talking about the curses, the blessings and curses? Curses? Deuteronomy 28. All right. Oh, look at it. They will know you are my disciples by the love you have for one another. Okay. Jesus pronounced judgment if the city. Oh, that's very good. Right. Jesus did. I believe that's Matthew 11. Matthew 11, right? So very good. See, I knew we would get some other examples here. All right. So you see how, this discussion is not just merely academic. We're just out in the wilderness somewhere, right? You can see that even the Bible, even the true propositions the Bible makes and uses this type of argumentation, right? In fact, I would argue, okay, and this is a conversation for a different day, that none of the apostles actually, when they talk about the truth of the Christian faith, they don't really appeal to using inductive arguments. They don't make probability statements, let's put it that way, about the truth of the resurrection. They make deductive claims like this most certainly happened, right? So I think when we think about our apologetic, that's something for us to think about, that we shouldn't be putting out probability arguments. We're talking about things that are certain and definitely occurred, right? So that's something for you to think about. Dwayne said, I was going to say 2 Chronicles 7:14, but someone already mentioned it, but you can mention it too, right? You can go ahead and say it as well. All right, let's press on. Next one. Either Susan is from the United States of America or Susan is from Australia. Susan is not from Australia, therefore Susan is from the USA. What form of deductive argument is this? Is it hypothetical? Is it disjunctive? Is it definition? And then why? I'm going to ask why, so get ready to give both answers. All right. Everyone thinking extra hard on this one? Berean Babe says disjunctive. And why, Berean Babes? Why, Violet? Seeley says disjunctive. Why, Seeley? Why? Berean Babe says the either. Yes. There, she looked and she sees a structure. There's a either or structure here. And then not just either or, there's also what else? What else is here? Don't worry, brother. You can always you can continue to follow along and also watch the replay as well as many times as you need to. But I'm going to explain why as well. So the either is part of it. Yes, it's either or, but then there's also something else. Look at the second statement. So either Susan is from United States of America or Susan's from Australia. Susan is not from Australia. So you have the exclusion principle. One of the options are taken away, which only leaves you with one remaining option, which is Susan is from the United States of America. So it's either A or B, yes, but then one of the options are taken away. So it necessarily follows, even though those words are not there, but looking at the structure would give us that impression that Susan most definitely, certainly, absolutely is from the United States of America. And Susie Q, yeah, I'm going to have to hit replay a couple of times for sure. Yeah, as many times as you need to. You got half of it. So the answer is disjunctive for the win. All right. All right, here we go. Next one. Two triangles fit into a square A. Therefore, the area of both triangles is less than the area of square A. What type of deductive argument is this? Is this mathematics, categorical, hypothetical? Yes, brother, we're all learning together. Indeed. So a few answers are showing up. Mathematics. Susie Q says mathematics. Yeah, this was kind of an easier one, right? And you remember mathematics was one of the first areas under deductive, our deductive definitions of different types of arguments. So definitely this is math here. Remember, we're focusing on the form, not on cogency and soundness today. Yes, mathematics. Next. So now we want to look at inductive arguments and their structure. Remember, you have prediction, analogy, causal, inference, generalization, authority, and signs. Okay, so we're going to be doing some practice problems with those. You ready? Set, go. Okay, the first card I chose was a diamond. The second card I chose was a diamond. The third card I chose was a diamond. So the entire deck of cards are diamonds, right? Now, remember, we're not dealing with whether or not this is a good argument, okay? Right? And I will tell you, first of all, this is not a good argument, okay? But what form of argument is this in? Is it an analogy, causal inference, or generalization? Susie Q says generalization. Seeley, if you answered here, you said causal inference. So causal inference would give us the idea of cause and effect in the structure of the argument. Do we see cause and effect there? That's the question, or vice versa. Is it structure with cause and effect? Because causal inference always deals with cause and effect. All right. So generalization, question mark. Are you sure about your answer? You got generalization, and then Dwayne says generalization. I want to know, why did you say a lot of generalizations? Why? When I gave the definition of generalization, what did I, if you took notes, recalled what I said, what do you look for in regards to an argument that's structured in the form of a generalization? Remember, what you look for is a sample size. Do we have a sample size here? We have card 1, card 2, card 3. So this is a sample size. So based on the sample size of the cards, a conclusion is being made by the entire deck. So this is actually a generalization. See that? See how that works? Okay. Next one. Okay, it's kind of funny. Flying taxis. Kind of take me to Back to the Future Part 2 days, right? Flying taxis are already being planned. Flying taxis have already been tested. Therefore, flying taxis will be used by the public soon. What type of inductive argument is this? Is this one of authority, signs, or prediction? And then why? Seeley says prediction. Thought of the Jetsons? Yeah. That's a good one too. And then Susie Q says prediction as well. So we got prediction and prediction. Karen says prediction. All right, so you're gonna have to explain yourself, brother. You said signs and predictions. So what is it that would indicate signs here? What is it about the structure of this inductive argument that would say, hey, this is the structure of signs? Will happen in the future. Yeah, yep. Good point. Will be. Remember the definition I gave of predictions where you have present or past information that's used to make a prediction about the future, right? So will be used in the future. You got things being planned, already been planned, already tested. These are past statements giving us an indication of what may be so in the future. So this is definitely you already got a prediction. All right, next one. The eyewitness said the bank robber had brown hair. Since the eyewitness has good vision, we conclude the bank robber has brown hair. Is this an inductive argument of authority, analogy, or prediction? Yeah, most definitely going to have to watch again. Yeah, repetition is always the key for learning anything, right? So Susie Q says authority. Karen says analogy. Remember, analogy, Karen's when you're comparing two things and then making conclusions about the commonality of two things. Do you see a commonality of two things being compared in the structure of this argument? So same goes for you, Dwayne. Do you see when we talk about analogy structure, when we talk about something being analogous in regards to inductive arguments, do we see two things being compared, a comparison between two things? And then a conclusion being made based on the comparison of two things. So Seeley says authority. Oops. I love it. I love it. Karen says authority. Kato, who just now showed up, K-Dub in the house, says authority. Conclusion based on eyewitness testimony. There we go. Eyewitness testimony. So this would be an argument of authority, right? So very good. So the answer is authority. Next. Sally and Cindy both like suspense novels. Cindy loved the latest suspense novel. Therefore, Sally would also like the latest suspense novel. Is this an inductive argument of authority, analogy, or causal inference? Yeah, brother Dwayne, what I'm trying to do is, man, we got a famine in the land when it comes to critical thinking, and sadly among professing Christians. This is why this is my labor of love. I want us to really be sharp. We should be the sharpest knives in the drawer, believers. All right. Let's see. Analogy is what Karen said. Kato was funny, said, since I said I know it's right, authority. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, we got to be careful with that, right? He said, I got my shower running and I hadn't even got in yet. Man, I'm not trying to run up your water bill, brother. Okay. All right. So I see analogy, a couple of analogies here. Okay, analogy from Karen, analogy from Susie Q. Then Seeley's throwing a curveball saying causal inference. Whoa, see, look at you. All right, getting in the shower, but got my speaker on. That's how I used to do. I would have those wireless speakers, And if I didn't want to miss a beat, Dwayne, I would have to, those ones that were waterproof. I would have those in there, and I would make sure that I would listen. I wouldn't miss anything. So even as I was getting ready for the day, and I was intent on listening to something, I most definitely would make sure I had those speakers in there. So let's see how we're doing. So it's not causal inference, Celie. It's not causal inference. The answer is analogy. Do we see why the answer is analogy? Do we see why the answer is analogy? The answer is analogy. Remember, I gave the definition just about two minutes ago. It's analogy because we're comparing two things, in this case, two people. Both Sally and Cindy like suspense novels. Cindy loved the latest suspense novel. Therefore, we can make a conclusion about Sally based on the commonality between Sally and Cindy. You see that? So this is what it's called an analogy. Okay. All right. I'm too tired to be giving answers. Yeah, so let's go to the next one. Let's go to the next one now, okay? So Samantha started to cry after she received her report card. Uh-oh, Samantha. So Samantha probably got a bad grade on her report card. What type of inductive argument is this? This is one from authority, analogy, or causal inference. Which one is this? Look at the structure. Look at the structure. Samantha started to cry after she received her report card. So Samantha probably got a bad grade on her report card. She was crying because, so think about that. And then look what the answer that Susie Q gave, causal inference. Karen, causal inference. The answer is causal inference. Very good. You're doing very good. Very good. As we're going through this first lesson, most of you are doing very well. And I'm pleased to see that. All right, next. All right, next one here. All right. The price tag says $25. So the logical thing to conclude is that the item, it shouldn't be image typo there, item cost $25. So what would we select? Authority, signs, prediction. Yeah, you're doing well. Yeah, even though you're tired, you're hanging in there, Celia. All right, so which one is it? Authority, signs, prediction. Okay, Karen says authority. Do we see an authority in the argument? Like an eyewitness, someone in position of power. Do we see any of that here in the argument? Susie Q says authority. Okay, I'm going to ask you why. Why are you saying that? Why are you picking that? Do we see someone of authority, an authority figure in the structure of this argument? The person who made the price tag would be the authority, but they're not mentioned in the. Here's what we can't do. We can't assume things that are not there, right? That's an argument from silence. So we gotta go with the information we have, right? We can't make any assumptions about anything that's not presented here. Okay. So it says the price tag. So one of the things about the definition of signs, if I wasn't clear, is that the definition of authority is that authority is based on any intelligent being. So I'm sorry, a sign is Sign is information presented by any type of intelligent being. So we would assume that someone wrote the tag there, but they're not part of the argument, right? The only thing that's part of the argument is the price tag. So CQ says signs, Karen says signs. The answer is signs. Okay. So we're about to close it out, ladies and gentlemen. You did good. Overall, you did very well with the practice problems and getting a deeper understanding of deductive and inductive arguments. So remember again, deductive arguments are structured in such a way that it's impossible to conclude that the argument is false, right? It necessarily follows. And remember, with inductive arguments, the argument is likely to be true. Therefore, it's improbable that it is false. It's improbable that it's false. So remember those two distinctions there, okay? Also, remember the indicator words that we talked about. So when we're talking about deductive arguments, indicator words like definitely, certainly, absolutely. Remember, beware of people who will use these words in a rhetorical fashion to try to bolster their argument when their argument doesn't have any of the premises to support a conclusion, or their premises may be altogether false. We're going to deal with the soundness and the cogency of arguments later. I know that some of you want to dig into that now, but we'll deal with that later. Today was all about the form of the argument. And then secondly, on the right-hand side, indicator words for indicative arguments like probably, reasonable, plausibly, and possibly. You see those indicator words? Those are telltale indicators that you're probably dealing with an inductive argument, okay? So with that being said, last but not least, remember these different categories for deductive and inductive arguments. And this is where we spent a great deal of time looking at examples and sample arguments to kind of get you in the water, so to speak, so that you get more and more familiar with these structures. So math, definition, categorical, hypothetical, and disjunctive. Those last three are types of syllogisms. And then on the right, you have inductive, prediction, analogy, causal inference, generalization, authority, and sign. So, this is what we'll cover. There's going to be more logic talk coming to a Caldwell Apologetics channel near you. And I hope you were all edified. I appreciate the audience participation. One last word before we dismiss is that I plan to conclude part 4 of identifying false teachers. Plan to release that live early next week. And we'll be done with that series, but I want to continue pressing on with logic. There's a lot we're going to cover there, and eventually we'll get to logical fallacies. And I mentioned things like the gambler fallacy earlier, like the dealing out of the cards. The odds are I must win now. No. That's not how it works. We want to deal with some of those fallacies, but we'll get there eventually. I'm trying to give you all the good foundation on how to think logically, which is to think biblically, and which is something all believers we should be striving to do, because to love our God with all our being means to also love God with our mind as well. All right, everyone, have a good evening. Remember, whatever you do, whether you eat or drink, we do all to what? The glory of God. Amen. Amen. Good evening.